In this video, we're going to talk about the planet of communication, Mercury. The planet closest to the sun is also known as the messenger of the sun, and it has to do with our intellect, our memory, and our mind. In this video, I will share secrets on how to maximize your Mercury sign. My name is Anastasia. I'm a traditional Western astrologer specializing in natal, relationship, and predictive readings. If you enjoy my content, please take a few seconds to show your support by leaving a like or a comment, subscribing, and pressing the notification bell. It really helps YouTube algorithm responds to that and helps shows my content to more people, so I appreciate that. You also have the option of saying thank you by buying me a coffee. I really appreciate everyone who has taken advantage of that. There's definitely at least one of you that has purchased me Kuzmi tea a few times at this point, probably like 3 times, so thank you for that. Before we dive in, if you have any questions, you want to know what your placements mean, what it all means together, because in this video we're just gonna look at your Mercury, which is just one planet and one sign, but a chart exists. Everything is interconnected. There is aspects, there's houses, there's planets and signs. So if you're curious to understand yourself better, book a reading on my website, anastasia.astrology.com. I can also do a predictive reading, look at your relationship, and answer any questions you have. Additionally, on my website, you can find the variety of candles and oils I create. For example, this is Mercury in Gemini. Highly recommend my Mercury candles and oils for anyone born with their Mercury in the sign of detriment or fall, Pisces or Sagittarius. If your Mercury is in a dark house, especially if it's in the 8th or the 12th houses, you might sort of struggle to see your own knowledge or struggle to feel like you fully know enough ever. If your Mercury is retrograde, for anyone born with Mercury retrograde, and if your Mercury is conjunct, square, opposite Saturn or Neptune, because in that case there might be a little bit more confusion in the mind. This is Mercury in Gemini. I also have Mercury in Virgo. I would recommend Mercury in Gemini for people whose natal Mercury is in a fire or air sign versus Mercury in Virgo for those whose natal Mercury is in an earth or water sign. You can definitely leave a comment if you're struggling to understand it, let me know. And if you don't know the sign of your Mercury, there will be a calculator in the description helping you figure out what sign your Mercury is in. Just put your information in, you need to know the date, the exact time, and the place, and it will tell you. Sometimes if you don't know the time, it's still fine, because Mercury takes about like 2-3 weeks in a sign, and more often than not, you're born on the day that is not the day Mercury shifted signs. If you are born on that date, then it's a little bit more complicated. But still, you know, a professional astrologer like me can definitely help you figure it out. So we're going to talk about Mercury in astronomy and Mercury in astrology. Mercury is the first one of the 3 inner planets besides Venus and Mars, and it is the closest to the sun. In fact, Mercury is never more than 25 degrees away from your sun. So if you're born, you can always know that there is only 3 possibilities, right? I'm a Virgo. Any Virgo will have their Mercury either in Leo, the sign before, Virgo, the sign of their sun, or Libra. So it can never be too far, purely based on the fact that Mercury is really, really close to the sun, and it actually circles the sun a variety of times, which is responsible for the famous phenomenon that everybody knows, Mercury retrograde. I would assume everyone who's here has heard of Mercury retrograde. I have recently spoke at a meeting about Mercury retrograde in the eclipse season and was surprised to find one person who never heard of it. And I was like, seriously? Because I feel like that's like a thing that everybody has heard about, even if they don't fully understand it. So the fact that Mercury is so close to the sun represents Mercury. You know, if you observe Mercury in the sky, it will constantly jump around. It will be rising before sun sometimes. On other days, it will be setting before. Yeah, sometimes it's like, sometimes you see it early in the morning before sunrise. Sometimes you see it right after sunset. Sometimes it disappears when it's really close to the sun because the solar light overpowers it. So it's like very kind of Figaro. In Russia, we have this like thing, figura здесь, figura там. I don't know if, I mean, for people who speak Russian, they might know what I'm talking about, but it's like this sort of, you know, quick moving, unpredictable, changeable quality that Mercury as the planet possesses. And that is why in astrology and like in, you know, in Greco-Roman myth, Mercury is connected to Hermes, and Hermes is the god that was the messenger of, oh, he was actually the messenger of the gods. And he was the only one who was allowed to move between the heavens and the hell. So he was like the one who could like transition and transfer. And Mercury in general has this like mutable, adjustable nature. That's why the signs ruled by Mercury, Gemini and Virgo, are both really like mutable. And, you know, Virgo is maybe a little less mutable because it's an earth sign. Earth by nature is sort of harder than air or water, right? So, but they are mutable. They're both really adaptable. Gemini is literally represented by the twins, and Virgo is constantly struggling with the polarity of like cleanliness, perfection, and imperfection, you know, going with the moment, being in the flow, or like overthinking things. So Mercury definitely is connected to, you know, in Greco-Roman myth with Hermes traveling from different places. In astrology, Mercury is connected to the unrestricted span of the mind, the quality to travel everywhere and anywhere. In our heads, so many things are going on, right? It's so crazy. Like sometimes you seem totally calm and collected on the outside, but in your head, you're just like crazy things, crazy thoughts might be popping up, right? So in the natal chart, Mercury represents, in general, Mercury represents 3 C's: communication, commerce, and commuting. But in a chart of an individual, it represents how you communicate, sort of your style of communication, how you learn, what you need to learn and feel most connected to the data you are absorbing. It represents your memory. A lot of times, if you see aspects between Mercury and the moon, if they're harmonious, like a conjunction, trine, sextile, people have really good memory. If it's a more difficult aspects, like an opposition or a square, there might be memory complications. Once again, highly, highly recommend Mercury in Virgo or Mercury in Gemini for any of that. It also represents your speech, your style of speaking, your writing. And like I said, on the physical level in the universe, Mercury rules over transportation and messages and transmission of data and internet and wires, bank accounts, funds moving around, packages being delivered. Hence why when Mercury is retrograde, all of this is just weird. How was your latest Mercury retrograde? Have you managed to avoid sending the wrong messages, reaching out to your exes? What is your overall sort of grade you'd give yourself? I don't think I sent any messages that I regret sending, but I've definitely had times in the past, and I need to look whether, I think it was Mercury retrograde, where I send a message saying something not so great about a person to a person. I was in my, you know, I think early 20s at that point, so let's give me forgiveness in that regard. And that is it in terms of the general kind of quick introduction of what Mercury is. I hope this makes sense, and I'm about to break down Mercury for all 12 signs. As always, this is just a really kind of zoom in on your Mercury sign. In order to understand how Mercury works perfectly, you need to know the entire chart, and for that you should book a reading with a professional astrologer like me. You can book one on my website, anastasiadoesastrology.com. Let's break it down. If you were born with Mercury in Aries, you're going to be someone who communicates very strongly. People will listen to you, they will be like, she or he or they really know what they're talking about. Like very kind of assertively, confidently, directly. Maybe you don't feel that way, but your speech is just like very strong. You might communicate a little louder, and very like energetically, right? Like I think fire signs are very like spirited. So being spirited, being inspired, being kind of like full of energy when you speak. Because Aries is very direct. So it also comes with like truly blunt speech. I used to have a friend, she had Mercury in Aries, and she would just always say things, and it like, It was just so kind of, very kind of unfiltered. But it really depends on different people. Like, once again, if your Mercury is in Aries, you would have to look what your Mars is doing, because Mercury in Aries is ruled by Mars. And if your Mars is in a more sort of chill sign of Taurus, for example, I think it will like mellow your Mercury out a little bit. But if it's Mercury in Aries in general, I think it's like a faster, more direct, more blunt, more confrontational Mercury sometimes. Like, you may kind of, speaking of like, how you learn, you may almost learn via arguing, via like debating, competing, because that is necessary in order to like feel connected to the information. Maybe your opinion changes. It's also very Aries being like a very youthful sign, childlike. That's where I think some of the bluntness comes in, because there is like very kind of my way or the highway type energy. The same friend I mentioned, she would just always be like, my Mercury is in Libra, so it's the opposite of her Mercury, and we would always like, I communicate in a super diplomatic, like charming, let's not hurt anyone way, and she would just be like, it's so direct, it would always be like too much for me. But she would always be like, yeah, but I still believe my way is the right way. And for me as a Mercury in Libra, I was like, I cannot. And she is also a Taurus sun, so that's like, I think together, just like Taurus thinking that they know what's up, and Mercury. And maybe you are a Taurus with Mercury in Aries. Please let me know. What is your Mars sign? How do you think it manifests in your life? Do you ever feel like your way of talking gets you in trouble potentially? Maybe it doesn't. You would quite enjoy talking about new ideas, new concepts, and like your brain can be like really, really great for coming up with ideas, especially if they're like daring and open-minded and competitive, entrepreneurial, like leadership type ideas. So definitely great for like starting new projects, for being honest, for being, I think like Mercury and Aries people will be like very protective of people they love. Do not get in a fight with them. They will tell you off. But sometimes this kind of like insensitive, the shadow side could be like being insensitive, inconsiderate, too blunt, and like hurting other people's feelings. If your Mercury is in Taurus, you're likely to be someone who communicates maybe a little bit slower. Taurus is a very like slow, steady, sensual side, so like kind of more carefully thinking about what you have to say, understanding that the words carry weight a lot of times. And it's not always going to be the case, but Mercury and Taurus people can almost like savor the words they're saying, and like kind of express, maybe like talk a lot more about feelings, about nature, sharing pictures of nature, being more connected to nature. Very artistic placement a lot of times, depending on the Venus sign. If your Mercury in Taurus and your Venus is in Taurus, or your Venus is in Libra, or your Venus is in Pisces, you're so much more likely to be like a good singer and like very charming communicator. Maybe you get compliments for the way you word your emails, or you word your happy birthday cards. Might be a little bit different if your Venus is in Aries or your Venus is in Virgo or Scorpio. In that case, definitely check out my Exalted Venus or Venus in Libra 2 candles, because they can help with that sort of chill out, relax, find the eloquent, feminine energy within you, if that's what you're looking for. But very like slow, steady, and in terms of like learning things, there can also be like a need to learn slowly and like not be rushed. So if like the teacher is rushing an answer out of you, you may need a little bit more time. You may need a little bit sort of more thinking in order to answer. You might be a lot more interested in talking about kind of like practical things in life. Once again, sort of nature-oriented, beauty-oriented, pleasure-oriented, maybe focused on like practical solutions, right? Taurus is a very kind of like down-to-earth, practical sign. So instead of like dreaming things up and imagining how things could be, you're more like, okay, how can we use what we have in order to make things happen? And of course, the shadow side of Taurus could be being like very confident of your opinions to a point of you don't like open yourself up to hear the other person's opinion. I meditate, and a lot of times in meditation, they talk about the beginner's mind. Like, yes, you have your strong opinions, but also being open to, you know, what might come in, what might change things up, being open to the fact that maybe what you know is not true. So I think every Mercury and Taurus person can like learn to be a little bit more flexible. And you can also be quite good with money with this placement, or sort of know where to put the money in, how to make money work for you. If you want to know more, if you want to understand your chart better, book a reading on my website, anastasiadoesastrology.com, and definitely let me know how this resonates, how this plays out in your life. Mercury in Gemini. This guy, this candle, Mercury in Gemini. Mercury in Gemini is in the sign of rulership. It's very strong. It's very powerful. Mercury has two home signs. It's Gemini and it's Virgo. And in Gemini, we are in the young domicile of Mercury. And young signs tend to be like very action oriented, very much let's collect all the data, let's spread all the data, very like fast, very sort of quick. Versus the yin sign in Virgo, it's more about we have the data, let's process it, let's analyze it, let's purify it like a virgin olive oil in order to get down to the bottom of things. So both very strong, but in their own unique ways. Like Gemini Mercury will generate 15 possible solutions to a problem, versus Mercury and Virgo will try to narrow it down. So if you're born with Mercury in Gemini, you're definitely in luck. You can look at which house Gemini is as well as which house Virgo is, and you're likely to see some blessings there. And of course, a lot will depend on the aspects in your chart, other placements. You can always book a reading with me to talk about that in more depth. But in general, you are someone who communicates very kind of smartly, very cleverly, very fluidly, quickly. There's almost like an urge to express your opinion right in the moment. Sometimes it might come across like, you know, you also are likely someone who knows a little bit about everything, someone who has studied a lot of things, has read a lot of things, and you can talk about anything and everything. But sometimes maybe your knowledge is a little bit more superficial. It's not really deep. So other people might feel like you're not quite like, you know, in depth or quite sort of connected to the moment once again, because Mercury in Gemini, I think Marilyn Monroe had Mercury in Gemini. Let me look it up. But it might, you know, it might feel like you are just too sort of fast and you've already moved on and you're like not paying attention that much. And it doesn't always mean that you're not paying attention. It might just seem that maybe you are, you know, you're just curious. Yeah, she definitely did have Mercury in Gemini. So this like kind of dual nature, right? Especially if you also have your sun in Gemini or some other placements. Like there might be this like dual, playful, who are you really type nature to this placement, because it's so adaptable. It's like constantly getting new facts, new data, and can change perceptions quite quickly. And a lot of times, like Mercury in Gemini learns through connecting with other people, through exploring different possibilities, through gathering a lot of different facts. If you have any Mercury in Gemini people, my best friend has it, and she's just like, you're gonna have a TV on in the background, talking on the phone, reading news on the laptop at the same time, or like, and like making sure your child is okay, like really, really good at multitasking. And that's why, once again, you know, I have like a Mercury in Gemini candle, and it's really good for people who want to be good at multitasking, of people who want to be able to juggle multiple balls, because that's what Gemini energy is. Very curious, always has lots of questions. As a Gemini moon, I've been told that I have never-ending questions. And that's why I get along really well with Gemini Venuses and Gemini Mercuries, because I'm like, yeah, you see me, you see my like sort of chaotic, let's talk about this, let's talk about that energy. of course, the shadow side, right? Like indecisive, too changeable, saying one thing, doing another thing. And of course, a lot will depend like on what your sun sign and how other aspects are playing into it, and can have a little bit of like more anxious, nervous predisposition, maybe always moving the hands, needing to like squeeze the stress ball while talking. So meditation is really good for you guys, and journaling, writing is really good. Could be also really, really good writers with this placement, or actors, or salespeople. Anywhere where you need that flexibility, adaptability is great. Let me know how this resonates, and if you want to know more, book a reading on my website, anastasiadoesastrology.com. Now, if you are born with Mercury in Cancer. Cancer is, of course, a very family-oriented, very nostalgic, very sensitive and emotional sign. So what happens when your Mercury is in that sign? You're likely to be someone who likes stories that have some kind of emotional meaning for you. Of course, you're not always going to talk about stories that have that emotional meaning, but you might enjoy talking about the past. You might enjoy talking about your family, remembering, like you're almost like your memory could be very like sensual. Like you might remember experiences, right? If Mercury rules memory, and Cancer is all about like the past and family. So like remembering the smell of something, remembering the taste of something, remembering how your mother's words made you feel, or how like grandfather wrapping a blanket over you made you feel. So you would communicate very emotionally, very like sensitively, compassionately, maybe sometimes a little self-protectively. You need to feel comfortable with people in order to share your true thoughts. Learning sometimes maybe is a little bit kind of, slower. Maybe you're relying more on your feelings and your emotions when it comes to learning. It's really good. Like I think Mercury in Cancer makes really good writers. And also a lot of times gives you a really good memory because it's ruled by Cancer. So Cancer is like very kind of, it's ruled by the moon. Moon is all about absorbing the light of the sun, reflecting it back. So it's like the moon absorbs the light. Cancer absorbs things and absorbs kind of memories. A lot would depend on what your natal moon is doing. So if you're Cancer Mercury, but your moon is in Capricorn, you might sort of jump back and forth between being very like sensitive and nurturing, but then at other point, the Capricorn energy kicks in and you're like, I gotta get stuff done. Like, let me finish things. And then it's like a little different. If your moon is in Scorpio or Capricorn, which are the signs of the fall and the detriment, I highly recommend my Moon in Cancer 2 candle, because this one has Moon in Cancer. It smells amazingly like moonflower nectar, and it's just like really, really good for helping you express those feelings, especially also if your Mercury is retrograde. This could be a great kind of contribution, great tool to have. So yeah, very good at writing. Sometimes you might prefer to like think things through and nurture new ideas in your head instead of like blurting them out like an Aries Mercury might, right? You're gonna be a lot more emotionally driven versus sort of rationally driven at times. You can be a great writer, historian, teacher, anywhere when you need to like nurture or work with history, the past. Could be lovely for you. And I think a lot of times it's like a quite poetic, imaginative, good memory type placement, which is helpful for like writers, historians, teachers. Let me know how this resonates, if this is your placement. And if you want to know more, book a reading on my website, anastasiadoesastrology.com. If your Mercury is in Leo, this is charming, this is bold, this is loud and noticeable Mercury. I have a friend, her daughter has Cancer sun with Mercury in Leo, and she speaks like a queen might. So Barack Obama is someone born with Mercury in Leo, very charming, right? So much charm, so much pride and kind of like radiant kingly energy. Imagine the king speak like a very confident king in themselves, right? Very warm, very like great sense of humor. If you think, if you think of like good speeches or good stories, they will always have an element of like, they can bring you to tears, but they can also make you laugh. It's a very creative placement, very kind of generous placement, I think, with their time, but they might actually focus on like talking about themselves a little bit too much, and that is something to watch out for, I think. A lot of times they need to be like creatively involved or to be seen in order to learn things, and can have like a very, I think, like strong urge to be heard. This is the kind of placement, like if this person said something and you didn't hear them, they're not likely to just let the thing you didn't hear slip. They will likely repeat it again, and you might actually notice that they speak louder. They sort of naturally have like a booming voice. But of course the challenge, it's a fixed placement. So the challenge is being too sort of sure of the opinions and not letting other people's opinions get involved, being too proud. If the ego gets hurt with this placement, it might be harder to be like objective and flexible. So be aware of that, and let me know if this is your placement. Does it resonate? If you want to know more, also book a reading on my website. On my website, you can also find my Sunlight in a Jar candle, which was created with the Sun in Leo. So if you're born with the Sun in Cancer or your Sun in Virgo and you want to give your Mercury a boost and help it get the attention it desires, you might check that candle out. Next, we have Mercury in Virgo. This is another strong placement, even stronger than Mercury in Gemini, because traditionally Mercury in Virgo considered to be both in rulership and exalted. And that's like the only placement this happens in, because normally there is like a separate sign of rulership and separate sign of exaltation. But with Virgo, Mercury is just so at ease, so happy that he like rejoices there. And so it's the domicile of Mercury, and like I said, in Gemini, it's a young Mercury, so it tends to gather all the data, grasp a bunch of opinions, be constantly changeable, curious, sort of always here, there. In Virgo, Mercury is a lot more about narrowing things down and finding the facts and finding the truth. Just a second. And I think that is why Mercury is in rulership in Virgo, because, in Gemini, you can gather a lot of data, but maybe just keep moving on and not doing anything with the information, versus Virgo being the sign of purification, narrowing down, creating sort of the virgin olive oil of the data. Mercury feels really comfortable. So what does it mean for you if you're born with this placement? Really good for the Virgo and Gemini houses in your chart. If you're a Virgo rising, for example. Sorry, I don't know why I need water. I mean, I do know why I need water. I don't know why I need it more than once right now. But, if you're a Virgo rising and Mercury is in Virgo in your chart, it would also rule the house of career, and it will rule your first house of identity. So it's more likely to give you like strong health, better luck professionally. And for any other rising, you will just look at the Gemini and Virgo houses. But you're someone who's likely to communicate very logically. You will be someone who backs the things you say with research and data. You will also try to be helpful and be quite humble in your speech. You might also like sort of err on the side of being like critical or negative sometimes, and that is the more shadow side. But Mercury in Virgo is really good at research. It has great analytical skills. It will need to figure things out and sort of edit things, right? So you might be editing your own thoughts. You might be editing what other people are saying. You might be editing data if you're an editor or a writer. You might be, like even in any job, even like a doctor, you might need to like edit certain things. And like, almost like, trying to narrow things down in order to absorb them and in order to learn. You will enjoy helping other people. And be extra aware of the details. So if you're born with Mercury in Virgo, you're someone who like will not send an email without double checking, will not publish a post without checking. It's a lot more like, gotta pay attention, gotta make sure that everything is perfect, versus, I'm a Virgo with Mercury in Libra, and sometimes I'm just like, I just go for it, and then later notice that I should have double checked it. Let me know how this resonates, and if you want to know more, book a reading on my website, anastasiadoesastrology.com. Next, if you were born with Mercury in Libra. So this is arguably, maybe together with Mercury in Taurus, but even more so, the most diplomatic placement. Libra is the sign of the opposites, the sign of the scales, constantly weighing things. Maybe a little bit indecisive, right? Let's start off the bat with a more shadow side of Mercury in Libra, a bit indecisive, a bit people-pleasing, right? Because there is that desire to be kind and be gracious and be eloquent. This is my placement, so I feel personally connected to it. But very sort of charming, really friendly, really good at getting along with people, probably giving people compliments, strangers, but also likes compliments. Likes to be objective, likes to be balanced, maybe capable of seeing multiple sides of the story and understanding multiple perspectives, sort of like needs to be impartial and very creative. It's quite a creative placement, quite a charming placement. It's funny because a lot would depend on the placement of your Venus. Simon Cowell and myself. But Simon Cowell has his Venus in Virgo, I believe. I feel like I always need to double check. But he does have, what am I typing? Simon Cowell, Natal Chart. And he's known for his ability to criticize and judge talent, right? Yeah, Venus and Virgo. So, he might do it in a very charming and eloquent way, but he's still doing like Venus and Virgo thing where he gets to like criticize people. But a lot of times, depending on the placement of your natal Venus, if your Venus is in Libra as well, or your Venus maybe is in Leo, you might be quite charming communicator. I think for everyone with Mercury in Libra, you will be a charming communicator where you get compliments for your style of writing, for your words, for your ability to put things together and say them in a beautiful way. Let me know if that resonates with you. I have definitely gotten that multiple times where people told me that they like the way I sign birthday cards and my birthday wishes and stuff like that. And you might have a beautiful voice too. You might have a voice that other people find quite like charming and beautiful and soothing. If you're born with Mercury in Virgo and your natal Venus is in Virgo too, if you're born with Mercury in Libra and your natal Venus is in Virgo, which is the sign of the fall, this is actually not too bad because Venus is ruled by Mercury and Mercury is ruled by Venus, so they have a mutual reception there. But if you wanted to get some additional help, I highly recommend Venus in Libra 2 candle because it could help maybe release a little bit of that self-critical or critical in general nature and relax and be in the moment. So, like I said, a really kind of lovely placement, but sometimes the shadow is being indecisive, maybe seeming like the communication doesn't have a ton of like emotion behind it because there's that need to be pleasant and charming. So it's not like necessarily the most emotional communicator, even if maybe inside you're quite emotional, you're not always showing it. Let me know how this resonates, and if you want to know more, book a reading on my website, anastasiadoesastrology.com. If you were born with Mercury in Scorpio, this is deep, this is probing, passionate Mercury. You may be someone who, most likely you're someone who doesn't like small talk. You don't like talking about superficial things, you would prefer talking about deep things. If somebody's sharing their secrets with you, kind of opening their heart to you, even better. You may be almost like really good at nonverbal communication. sending people looks and giving them signals and, you know, kind of communicating through body language a lot or through looks. And you crave like a deep connection through communication. It's not just a means of relaying facts and information. Speaking of facts and information, Mercury in Scorpio, because it's that like deep and probing energy, can be really good as like a detective, a therapist, an investigator, researcher, because you will be able to like dig really deep and see below the surface level, below what people are saying. You're likely can read them and understand what they're saying, right? Or like what is going on within that they're actually not saying. But the shadow side is, of course, you know, it's a fixed sign. So sometimes there could be an element of like stubbornness, being too sure of the opinions. There could be a little bit of like classical Scorpio self-protectiveness, where you are afraid to share your true feelings, maybe trying to withhold some information from people, like needing kind of secrecy to a point where it's hurting your relationship, or you're, you know, like you kind of, I think you need to be careful in terms of, yes, trust your intuition in terms of people that are worth your trust. But then when you're in a relationship with somebody, share your feelings with them. Like, don't feel like sharing emotions will make you vulnerable. Deeply passionate, I think, placement. Really good at investigating things and understanding things on a deep level. Could also be quite like, I think with Mercury in Scorpio, you're likely to have a very, very deep memory. Let's say if your moon is also in Scorpio, or some other placements where you remember how things made you feel. Because it's a water sign, there might be like a lot of connection to feelings. If you were born with Mercury in Sagittarius, this is a placement that is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter likes to, you know, expand, grow things, and find a sense of unity, which is a little bit contradictory to the nature of Mercury, because Mercury is all about taking things apart. So Mercury in Sagittarius is considered to be in its detriment, and I highly recommend my Mercury in Gemini or Mercury in Virgo candles for this placement. But it doesn't mean that something is wrong with your Mercury. What it means is that Mercury in Sagittarius is someone who will focus more on the big picture and sometimes maybe forget about the details, right? It's more about like coherence, big picture. And I think people with Mercury in Sagittarius can be really like charming, passionate talkers, but maybe, you know, they're not like, Jupiter is big, Jupiter is expansive. So it's not a sign that will narrow things down. It's a sign like, if you're born with Mercury in Sagittarius, you're likely to talk a lot. You're maybe telling longer stories. If somebody is telling you to write a paper that is 2 pages, you may write 5 pages, because you're just a good storyteller. And so while it might be a little bit difficult for you sometimes in terms of narrowing things down and editing, that's why Mercury in Gemini or in Virgo would be really, really, really great addition. You can also be a very enthusiastic, charming speaker and a really good book writer, because to write a book, you need to know a lot, right? Like, you need to be able to shape the story beautifully. Robert Hand, the astrologer that wrote a few books, has Mercury in Sagittarius, and you need that kind of placement for that. So it's like, if you have a weaker placement in astrology, it's all about how do you apply it versus being like, terrified of it. Mercury in Sagittarius people tend to communicate very openly, very honestly, very enthusiastically, charmingly. They like to teach you things. A lot of times they learn by teaching. It's very, you know, Jupiterian. Sagittarius is like a teacher, conquistador, half man, half horse, sort of like likes to have a mission. So I think you might enjoy learning and then definitely sharing. You might be a good teacher. And I think very interested in like long-term goals, very interested in having some kind of purpose, some kind of a mission. But the shadow side could be being too blunt and like all the mercurial facts and little things slipping through past your attention, right? Like forgetting to respond to an email, or forgetting to check the details because you got so excited about traveling to Paris, but you didn't check that the train is not running, and then you're sort of stuck. So learning to be more kind of focused on the details and balanced could be a lesson here. Let me know how this resonates, if this is your placement, and if you're curious to know more, book a reading on my website, Anastasia.astrology.com. If you were born with Mercury in Capricorn, this is a very authority presenting placement, very kind of serious, cautious, structured, and yeah, definitely somebody who carries themselves with a sense of authority. You may be someone who doesn't speak a lot, but you speak. When you do speak, you say things that matter, and your words have weight, and you understand that they do, for sure. Sometimes Saturn-ruled Mercury, as in this case, could be a little bit more critical, a little bit more negative, maybe seeing challenges before seeing possibilities, but it's also a sign of you being someone who, you know, like I think sometimes having that realistic perspective and maybe thinking like negative thoughts or being a little bit like more grounded can also help you persevere. It can help you learn, can help you, you know, stick with things. It could definitely be a very like grounded, very rational placement, very focused on getting tangible results, getting work done, getting sort of, you know, what is the bottom here? What is the story here? At times be a little bit reserved, and especially if your Mercury is retrograde, highly recommend my Mercury in Virgo candle for you guys. But oh, and one other thing that I kept on, like, I was like, there's something that I wanted to say. Mercury in Capricorn can be someone who's like really good at navigating the rules, navigating the system, maybe even being someone who like upholds the rules, upholds the laws, knows the regulations, and you do that for work where you are like very aware of, you know, how much money goes here, how much money goes there. You might also quite naturally be good at also talking about money or knowing about money, giving advice about money, but also like very kind of strong understanding of like the system and the workings of things, and then ability to use that knowledge to your advantage. Let me know how this resonates, and if you're curious to know more, book a reading on my website, Anastasia.astrology.com. Next, if your Mercury is in Aquarius. Aquarius is traditionally a Saturn-ruled sign, but if in Capricorn we're talking about Saturn that is yin, working within the structure, in Aquarius we're talking about Saturn that is yang, that is rebellious and rule breaker and all about working outside of the structure, right? So if you're born with Mercury in Aquarius, you're likely to be quite open-minded, and you need to sort of think experimentally. You are very innovative. You maybe like talking about humanity and the future and community and making the change happen, right? In that way, you're also quite idealistic in the way you communicate and like intelligent. And you can maybe like overthink a little bit because it's an air Mercury. May come across, this placement quite often gets the detached energy in the way you communicate, because I think, you know, Gemini has that like childlike changing things up. Libra has the charming exterior, but like both of them can be blamed for being like too detached. But Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, and in that pursuit of discussing concepts and ideas and theories, there might be, what's missing might be like sort of the soul underneath it all, right? Not for everyone, depends a lot on other placements, but I think just taken on its own, Mercury in Aquarius can definitely be very like fact-oriented. Really good at making friends, really good at organizing groups maybe, and, you know, connecting with people, almost like you kind of need to connect with people in order to learn about things, and you need to connect with an idea. Can be a little bit, I think, unique in the speech, unique and maybe a little bit eclectic in terms of things you know, because that your knowledge can be driven by what you find is important. So it's like, I'm thinking of like, you know, Sherlock Holmes that had knowledge of like the types of soils and the types of bullets but didn't know that the earth is round. I think it was something ridiculous like that. But it's a really great placement to have for like any kind of, you know, progressive professions, any altruistic roles, working for a nonprofit, making change happen, because in your head you have the power to like come up with a solution, brainstorm, problem solve, like figure out unique solutions to old problems. You might also be someone who's like naturally interested in talking about climate change and the world and, you know, kind of difficult things that are happening in the world. But the other side of you, because Aquarius is very unconventional, could be also very romantic, right? So you're like very scientific, but then turn it around and there's going to be like a very romantic, sensitive side to you. Last but not least, if you were born with Mercury in Pisces, this is very dreamy, very sensitive placement, very sort of caring and kind, but a little bit changeable, right? Because Pisces is a mutable sign. It definitely transforms and adapts. So I think in your communication style, you can be someone that like adjusts based on who you're talking to. Very compassionate, very creative. So Mercury in Pisces has this like unique imaginative attitude and can be a great graphics designer, writer, poet. I think there is a guy who's like, I think he does something like very scientific. So not, you don't have to just be like dreamy poet, but you can also be, I think Mercury in Pisces will always be able to like tell a story. And so you can be a scientist, but you still use Mercury in Pisces to tell a story. The challenge here, because Mercury in Pisces is considered to be in its detriment, is sometimes getting the facts right. Sometimes being able to like explain what you're feeling, because Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is very like big. And in Pisces, it's very emotional, and sometimes it's really hard to separate your feelings, your perceptions from the actual facts. And your perceptions might be totally correct, especially depending on your sign, on your Jupiter sign. If you're born with Jupiter in Pisces or Sagittarius or Cancer, lovely. If you're born with Jupiter in Virgo, Capricorn, or Gemini, then it's a little bit more complicated. In that case, I'm about to make some Jupiter candles. Definitely be on the lookout. But in general, if you're born with Mercury in Pisces, highly, highly recommend my Mercury candles with Mercury in Virgo or Mercury in Gemini. Could be really great for you in terms of like, you know, not forgetting to answer emails, not forgetting to check the details. Like Mercury in Pisces placement can be sort of, you know, like, oh, I forgot to check how to get from the airport to the hotel, and I ended up paying like $300 for a cab because it was really far, instead of like Mercury in Virgo, right? They would check everything. They would send the emails. They would do the research. They would print out the itinerary. So I think that's like the challenge here. But every placement has its strengths. So I think with Mercury in Pisces, sensitivity, empathy, creativity, imaginative nature, deep sort of inner nature, even like flexibility in opinions could be a strength in my mind. And I think, you know, being able to pick up on the energies of other people, being kind of like psychic, intuitive in that regard is great. But of course, once again, the shadows are maybe being a little bit unsure of the facts versus perceptions, maybe daydreaming, maybe self-deception, right? Telling yourself, yeah, I'm going to start exercising tomorrow every single day, and not starting. So Mercury in Virgo, this is my Mercury in Virgo oil. I actually apply it all the time because it's like, it smells very refreshing. I might only have a few of these left, but it's a great choice for any Pisces placement because you need that balance. You need the earthy and the dreamy together. If you want to know more, book a reading on my website, and please let me know, my website, anastasiadoesastrology.com, please let me know how this resonates. How is this placement for you? Do you feel like it's getting better as you get older, as every single placement does? And do you feel like I did justice to your placement? As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching and supporting me by leaving likes, comments, and subscribing. I really appreciate every single one of you, and I hope we'll work together, stay together, have our talks for many, many more years to come. So thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.